Now to our breaking news out of the Philippines. We are learning that the first and largest integrated resort in Manila, this is a casino and resort, there are reports of explosions and gunfire in the Philippines. This is just breaking over the past 15 minutes or so. We do not know anything more except to tell you that there are reports of gunmen who stormed the resort. No word yet on potential injuries, but there have certainly been video and pictures circulating of plumes of smoke, and this is located again in Manila, right near the airport there.
Joining us now by phone, Ron Hosko, our CBS News security analyst and former assistant director at the FBI. Ron, when a situation like this happens abroad, what do the police and the Army or the military do?
You know, typically with any of these situations that we here would start to look at in terms of it being an active shooter, law enforcement and the military worldwide have really learned from these events over the last decade or so. And the goal is, if it is active, you're really trying to, as quickly as possible, mitigate the threat. And that means moving toward the sound of the gunfire and trying to identify the shooters and eliminate the threat, which means fire back and try to stop the carnage. Now, these can be very complex. You may have multiple participants, and as we've seen in America, very often our active shooter incidents are, almost always a single person. Very seldom is it more than one person involved, although it can be. Here, if you're talking about a terrorism incident, that can get complicated very quickly. You can have multiple shooters on multiple floors in multiple locations. You can have the involvement of explosive devices that really change the dynamic of a police response, a military response, or a combined response. And in a perfect situation, depending on the intelligence that is coming out of the event scene or elsewhere, you certainly could have the authorities trying to start an engagement with people on the phone that may be the attackers or somebody else, to try to understand what their expectations are.
Ron, I can't remember the last time that I've heard of Manila, the Philippines, ever being a target of a large-scale Western, attack, attacking a Western-type target. Well,
that's a fair assessment, but the reality is, particularly when we're talking about terrorism, there are smaller scale terror incidents around the globe happening almost on a daily basis that do take fewer lives, that result in less media coverage, but where there is really constant activity around the globe, and certainly in the Philippines. The Philippines are hardly immune from Islamic-style terror attacks. There are groups there that are Al-Qaeda affiliates, that are Islamist groups. Jama'at Islamiyah is out there, Abu Sayyaf. There are a number of groups who have, who are based there and who have affiliates there that engage in terror, in kidnappings, in bombings, in gunfire on a fairly regular basis.
So, Ron, what does your gut tell you here? We're hearing reports of armed men wearing all black and potential masks here that had stormed the hotel there. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think my supposition, and probably most people's in this, 2017, goes immediately to Islamic terror. However, you have a president in the Philippines who has an aggressive anti-drug campaign going on, and it is far more aggressive than we would ever tolerate in America, where military groups are going out trying to mitigate their drug problem. And there's a lot of gunfire, a lot of loss of life based on that. And, I think in my mind, you have to keep space for something that is not Islamic terror or a version of it, and have room for other alternatives. I think it would be a mistake, certainly for law enforcement or the military there, if they have no pre-event intelligence, to rule out other options and assume Islamic terror, because there could be other options. And this could be, an angry group, domestic group, that is pushing back on this counter-drug effort by the president. and trying to make a statement or a stand here. But, you know, the default, I think, in 2017, because of other worldwide events, is Islamic terror.
If you're joining us right now, we have just received word within the past few minutes about an explosion and gunfire near a hotel casino in the capital of the Philippines, in Manila. Apparently, it's not too far, right across the street, as we're told, from the airport, the international airport there. Ron Hosko joins us now by phone. Ron, we are hearing from our producers who monitor this that so far there's been no claim issued by ISIS on their usual channels. You were talking about the potential of Islamic terror potentially being behind it, but you also mentioned how the president of the Philippines, Duterte, has been very active going against the drug lords in that country. We've been monitoring this for the past few minutes now. Ron, when you look at this situation and you're talking about containment in the first few minutes, what needs to go down?
Well, you hit it right on the head. First of all, you want to contain this threat. And we saw in Mumbai almost a decade ago how terrorists in that case were moving to different locations around the city. And so one of the first things any law enforcement or military group's going to try to do is set up a perimeter so you don't extend the pain to other parts of the city. Isolate, contain the threat, see if there's an opportunity to engage with someone, or if this is merely a terror group that's looking to exact as many victims as possible, and then respond accordingly. And that may have to be a very aggressive counterattack by law enforcement and or the military that is using heavier weapons. There's likely to be, if that's how it plays out, a heavier loss of life unless terrorists are somehow pinned down in isolation where they don't have a group of hostages that they're controlling. And this can be very dynamic because at the time you're trying to close a loop around this event and try to move closer to get the intelligence, it's very likely that law enforcement, that the responders are taking fire. And so you're trying to figure out, is there somebody I can communicate with and talk to and understand what their purpose is while I'm trying to mitigate at the same time. And that may mean getting somebody in my gun sights.
And Ron, if this does turn out to be Islamic terror, why do you think Manila would be a target?
You know, these Islamist groups are in many countries around the globe. And whether it is, some recent inspiration coming from, ISIS Central, whether this is some sort of other, offshoot that is engaged in their own plotting, which we see with other al-Qaeda affiliates, whether it's Boko Haram or al-Shabaab in Africa, or you see al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula looking to bring down American planes and Western planes still today. These groups now, we have to assume that there is not central command and control, that these groups are very often left to their own devices, left to their own timing. They decide when and how, and then later somebody claims credit for it. I think it would actually be today, in this very moment, probably premature for ISIS to make a claim or for somebody else to make a claim, assuming they had a role, because that claim may later be discredited, and then in some way they lose traction, they lose that narrative. So, and typically what you hear is ISIS making a claim quickly after the dust has settled, but not during the event itself.
Yeah, and right now we have no indication from ISIS. It is still early. If you're following us now, joining us now, explosions and gunfire heard near, not too far from the Manila International Airport. Ron Hosko, CBS News security analyst and former assistant director at the FBI, joined us. Ron, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.